Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to Mr. Sharad Rao, who has been a renowned barrister for the last 60 years. Uh, he was born in Kenya, a barrister of Lincoln's Inn, London, and is a chairman of the Judges and Magistrates Vetting Board and a former director of public prosecutions, and served on several occasions as Attorney General of Kenya. In 2015, he was awarded with one of Kenya's top presidential awards, the Elder of the Burning Spear, for distinguished services to the nation. Not only in law, but he has also been actively involved in sports administration in Kenya as well as internationally, notably as honorary legal advisor to the Commonwealth Games Federation, and was honorary legal advisor. Upon retiring, is now honorary life president. So he's also a member of the IOC Court of Arbitration for Sports and served as judge on its ad hoc court at the Olympic Games in Athens in 2004, Beijing in 2008, and London in 2012. He also serves on the International Cricket Council's Ethics and Conduct Committee, and one of the 3 members on the Tribunal, which dealt with spot fixing allegations, etc., and the dispute resolution panel of the ICC World Cup in 2010, as well as the FIFA World Cup in 2010. He's also a member of China's prestigious arbitration body, China International Economic, Trade and Arbitration Commission. He's famously also the author of the Indian Dukkawalas and their contribution to the economic and political development of Kenya. I can go on and on about his roles and his achievements, but let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Sharad Rao. Very welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, man.
So it's both inspiring, and I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation to a lot of our audience to see how during your times, during such a long career that you've spanned, you've been able to contribute to so many sectors in spite of maybe many setbacks that were caused by probably the environment or people during those times. So it's I'm very grateful for you to accept this.
In fact, there was a headline in one of the newspapers, The Nation, which said Jomo to Uhuru. Jomo was our first president, and Uhuru was the one before now. So I served under Jomo, Moi, then Baki, then Uhuru. And the title of this article in The Nation was Jomo to Uhuru, Rao's 9 lives. So the problems that I faced during the period that I served the 4 presidents. Yeah. And that's going to be my autobiography, which I'm in the process of writing. It's almost
lovely.
And the title of that autobiography is going to be Jomo to Uhuru, Rao's 9 lives.
Lovely. I think our audience will be very happy to get a copy of that once it's out. That's going to be very nice. So, I mean, it would be natural in a sense after we spoke about this to ask you about how you started off in Kenya, your maybe your birth, maybe your childhood, and how you got into law, or like this story. Probably it would be one story.
Well, let me start by saying that I was born in Kenya, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was born in Kenya. My parents had come to Kenya in 1931.
Okay.
1931 in May, and we are 2 brothers. We were both born in Kenya. And in those days, in 1930, I was born in 35. There was still racial discrimination in Kenya. Schools, universities, restaurants, hospitals were all segregated on the basis of Europeans and non-Europeans. So therefore, there was only one maternity home where Indian women could deliver. My brother was delivered in that hospital, but I was delivered at home as was the practice among Asians. Most of the children born were born at home and were delivered by Indian midwives. Okay. So that's how I was born on it was a full moon, apparently the day after the October full moon, which is called Sharad Purnima. That's why I was named.
Lovely.
But I was telling you that my parents came here in 1931. And that's because my mother was involved in the Indian freedom struggle. She was number 2 to this lady, the famous lady. She was in the India movement. And what had happened was that she went to jail several times. And while she was in jail, their first child apparently died. And my father didn't want to tell her until she was released. And when she was released, she thought that the best way to get her out of this freedom movement was to leave the country. So in the meantime, he had arranged with some contact in Kenya to get a job in Kenya. And that's how, almost a week after she was released from prison, they set sail and came to Kenya. That was 1931.
1931, okay. So, and after this, you were also naturally schooled in Kenya, and then you probably did your first part of education as well here. How was that?
I went to school in Kenya, and I did my senior Cambridge. At those days, even the schools were divided racially. Europeans had their schools, Asians their different school, Africans had a different school. So I went to only one Indian school at the time, which was called the Duke of Gloucester School. First it was called the Government Indian High School. Then it became the Duke of Gloucester School. So I went to Duke of Gloucester School, as most Indians did, because that was the only school at that time. And I did until senior Cambridge. And I could not go beyond senior Cambridge, because senior Cambridge is the equivalent of O-level. I could not go beyond that because of financial constraints. So when I finished my Cambridge examination, I joined Kenya Shell. And I worked for Kenya Shell from 1953 December to 1956. So in 1956, one of my bosses said that I was wasting my time in Shell and why don't I go up and do higher education. And he suggested take up law. So that's when I applied to Lincoln's Inn. And I applied to Lincoln's Inn despite the fact that I did not have advanced level, which was a requirement. I had only the O level. The second requirement was that we had to do Latin, which I hadn't done. And yet I was fortunate that I was given admission by Lincoln's Inn. So I went there in 1956 and I completed my law studies in 1959 and came back.
Okay. Came back to Kenya after that.
That's right, yeah.
Yes, lovely. So what was your upbringing like, in a sense? Was it a mix of Indian and Kenyan? I would expect, but then I was thinking because your school was probably an Indian school and parents were Indian, but also the setting I'm just trying to imagine that for the audience.
As I said, Kenya was racially segregated, right?
Right.
Schools were different, colleges were different, hospitals, clubs, everything was segregated on racial lines. So basically between Europeans and Indians, Africans didn't really matter at the time because they were not in a position to even go to school or come into business or come into any kind of profession. So it was mostly between Europeans and Indians. And we we lived in our own surrounding. For instance, I grew up all along right at my school level and in an area which was totally Indian. So we never mixed with Africans, we never mixed with Europeans. And it was just the Indian community that mixed with.
That's very interesting.
We didn't even feel in those days the effect of the segregation or anything. So we lived in our own quarters, we mixed with the other Indians, and that's a life.
Okay, so your Indian heritage has influenced a lot of your success in Kenya, in a sense, or how does that?
No, I don't think that is because I'm an Indian. As I said, 1956 is when I went to England, came back here in 1959, started practice. And fortunately, at the time, this was the movement when Kenya was fighting for independence. There were lots of Africans arrested, taken to court for nationalistic or involved in the freedom struggle. And fortunately for me, most of those cases came, there were two Indian lawyers, and most of those cases came to one of us. And we did it almost pro bono basis. So I defended a number of freedom fighters with very little money, or some with no money at all. But that gave me the foundation of establishing myself as a criminal lawyer in Kenya. And this went on from 1960s when I had started practice. And right up to 1970, I was in private practice. And I had made a name as a criminal lawyer in Kenya. So in 1970, up to 1970, all the directors of public prosecution, the DPP as called, were European. And in 1970, the president took the step. He wanted an African to take over. And they had an African called James Karugu, who was a senior state counsel in the Attorney General's office, take over as the DPP. But they felt they didn't have enough experience. So I was now from private practice to go there, especially a post was created for me as assistant DPP. With my experience and his lack of experience. That's how I joined the Attorney General's office in 1970 as assistant DPP. In 1982, I was appointed the DPP and served several times as Attorney General, but didn't actually hold the position in a substantive position as Attorney General.
Okay, very nice. You mentioned, of course, that in the 1960s, the agitation for the freedom struggle had begun. And do you recount any instances where, as your role as a lawyer, an impactful situation like that, or a case, or
let me take you back to a very interesting situation. You know that India became independent in 1947.
Right.
Exactly a year after, in August 1948, Nehru appointed a person called Appa Pant. He was from a princely state, Aundh, near Pune in India. And he was appointed as the first Commissioner General, because Kenya was not independent, so you would not have a High Commissioner. He was appointed as the first Commissioner General for East Africa. He came here in 1948. And to his credit, he immediately he made friends with Africans, African leaders. He helped them. He actually gave them the freedom struggle. There was no freedom struggle in 1948 when he came. It was a movement for land. They were fighting for land. If the Europeans had given them some land, I think freedom would have been delayed by another 10, 15, 20 years. But Appa Pant then put it into their heads that they should not be fighting for land, they should be fighting for freedom. So he's actually the initiator of the freedom movement in Kenya. And he sheltered those people because they started a movement called Mau Mau, which was a violent movement. They were fighting the British. And many of them were arrested and were running away from the British being arrested. They were being sheltered by him at his home, to the extent that he was accused of collaborating with the freedom fighters. And eventually the British government asked for his recall. And he was recalled to Kenya. He went back to India. But he is the person who actually started, as I said, he was pivotal in the Kenya freedom struggle. So his contribution to the Kenyan freedom movement is really significant.
Amazing, lovely. Very nice to hear. You were appointed the Deputy Public Prosecutor around the same time when President Kenyatta became the first President of the Republic of Kenya. So would you like to...
When President Kenyatta was in power, I was an assistant DPP.
Assistant DPP, yeah.
As I said, to help the person that they had in mind, that they had appointed as the DPP, and I was his assistant. But let me tell you that during Kenyatta's time, that was the highest position that an Indian could hope for. Because Kenyatta never wanted Indian in any higher position than that. It was after Kenyatta, when Arab Moi came into power, that I was appointed the DPP. This would not have happened in Kenyatta's time. It happened in President Moi's time. That was in 82. Yeah.
Right.
82 to 84, I was the DPP here. What happened is that my immediate boss, the Attorney General, out of favor with the President.
Right.
And setting up an inquiry against him. And now when they were setting up an inquiry against him, I was perceived to be very close to the former Attorney General. And so it was felt that it would not be convenient to have me as the DPP at a time when I was setting up an inquiry against him.
Right.
So I was called by the President and first removed from my position as DPP and appointed a of a commercial body. Yeah, chairman of the rest of some association, to deal with commerce. Then I was in that position for about 6 months, but I was in contact with this former Attorney General, and all that was being to the President. So 6 months later, I was called by the President to State House, and he told me that he had put me in that position purely because that tribunal was in a mess, and he knew to clear the mess, which I had now done. So he said that we had an offer from the Commonwealth Secretariat to nominate someone for the tribunal that was being set up, the Iran-US Games Tribunal that was being set up in The Hague. So he asked if I would be willing to go to The Hague. And I told him, I said, President, you want me to go? I will go. He said, no, I'm not asking you to go. I am offering this to you because you have done so much for us, and I felt that we should reward you with this international nomination which has come from Holland. So would you be willing to go? So I said yes, and that's how I went to Holland. So when I came to Holland, he had sent me, at that time he told me, I'm sending you there for 1 year. Because let political dust settle. That is the dust created, as I said, by the inquiry against the former Attorney General. So he said, let that settle, then you can come back. But I went for 1 year, and I stayed in Holland for 12.
Lovely. Lucky for us, you stayed in Holland for 12 years, and then now
we loved Holland. My wife was particularly keen on staying on in Holland. We had so many friends, very close friends, who are still close friends. And in fact, I regard Holland as almost like my second home. So we stayed there for 12 years. And after 12 years, I came here on a visit. At that time, there was a big scam. It was called the Goldenberg scam, which involved an young Indian of 41 years old called Patni. Now, Patni asked to meet me, and I went to meet him. And during the meeting that I had with him, he asked me whether I would defend him. And I said, Mr. Patni, I don't live here, I live in Holland. He said, no, it's not a problem because I will arrange for you to have a flat and secretary, office, everything. And you can travel between here and Holland at my expense, there's no problem. So 2 weeks later, I was called to come and defend him. When I came, it was news in Kenya because I was a immediate former DPP. Now, and probably he had in mind politically that the former DPP is now defending this man who is accused of a major scam. So that's how I came. And because I came, it drew headline news that the former DPP was now going to defend this man who was accused of this scam. And cases started flowing to me. Big cases started coming to me, and I would defend here and I would go fly back to Holland. So I kept on shuttling between Holland and Kenya. And then I told my wife, I said, this is too much, why don't we move back to Kenya? That's how we returned to Kenya in 1996 after 12 years in Holland.
Okay, very nice. During your explanation, you also mentioned about the Iran-USA, the tribunal. Can you explain a little bit about how that happened and what happened?
There was, of course, this lot of disputes arising in Iran after they removed the Shah. So after the Shah was removed, and there were so many claims between Americans and Iranians. Iranians against America, Americans against Iran. And they set up in 1978 under what is called the Algiers Accord. There was a meeting in Algiers where the two nations got together, and through intermediaries, it was decided to set up this tribunal to settle those disputes between Iran and US. And it was agreed that the tribunal would be established in The Hague. So I was then appointed. My appointment was actually to do with what was called small claims. Claims under $200,000 were referred to as claims, as I was in charge of those claims, those under $200,000. Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. And did you have to, because
let me tell you how interesting it is.
Please.
After 4 years as in that capacity, I had a visit from a representative of the American embassy.
Okay.
He came and he sat in front of me, and he said to me, Sharad, I have a message for you from the State Department. The State Department has asked me to offer you the green card to be able to settle in America. So I said, thank you very much, but I have no intention of going to America, because when I finish this assignment, I'm going back to Kenya. So he said, but your predecessors, every one of them was so keen. I said, maybe, but I have no particular interest to go to the United States. When I finish this assignment, I'll be going back to Kenya. So he turned around and he said, but Sharad, I must tell you, the State Department is not happy with you.
Oh.
I said, here a moment ago, you were offering me the green card.
Exactly.
The State Department is not happy with me. Tell me why. He said, they said that you are favoring Iranians. I said, look, this is my job as an arbitrator. I arbitrate between Iran, Americans and Iranians, and I make no discrimination. But what happens is that the Americans are defended by, usually represented by a team of lawyers from America. Whereas the Iranian has one lawyer. He comes here, and for the 1.5 hours or so we allocate for the case, for 1 hour he talks about the atrocities committed during the Iran, the reign of the Rana of the Iran between So I said, look, I don't favor them, but because they are represented by this one lawyer, who of the 1.5 hours that we allocate for him, he spends about an hour telling us about the atrocities committed by Americans in Iran. So I stopped him and I said, look, you've got half an hour left. Can you now address us on the law? So he said, but why do you do that? I said, look, my job here is an arbitrator. I mean, to not. She said, no, you should leave him at that. If he doesn't want to address you on the law, why bother? I said, no, sorry, that's not my style. And because I want to hear the legal argument before I can actually make my decision in favor of the American or in favor of the Iranian. So he said, in that case, I'm very sorry, but the State Department may not renew your contract. So I said, fine. I said, I'm not going to change. I will arbitrate as best as I can without fear or favor. And if the State Department is not happy with it, it's up to them not to renew my contract. So after 4 years, my contract was not renewed.
Okay.
Then, of course, I did all kinds of odd things, wanting to stay on Holland. So for 8 years, we were in Holland, where I was now hoping to get into the International Court, the International Criminal Court, and things like that. Didn't happen. So eventually,
came back to Kenya. Okay, interesting. So, in your experience with the judicial system in Kenya or something, and with being the chairman of the Judges and Magistrates Vetting Board, how would you assess the judicial system in Kenya? And also, can you make us probably understand what the vetting board does?
You see, the judicial system was based very much on the Indian Penal Code. All Indian laws applied, and the common law.
Very interesting.
So that is basically how the judicial system here started, right? And to practice in the courts here, You had either to be an advocate from India, then you were called an advocate, or a barrister from England. If you went to England and qualified, you came as a barrister. From India, you would be an advocate, and eventually they set up a school here to train local Africans as lawyers. But at the time, I think the judiciary, in my time when I first came, was all European. Entirely, the entire judiciary. All judges, all magistrates were European. And gradually, after when Kenya became independent, they started now again. So some Asians were brought in as judges, some Asians were brought in as magistrates, and eventually the Africans also came in.
Right. Okay. Very, very interesting.
So what happened in 2011, I think it was, that there were lots of allegations. One thing about the Europeans was they were not corrupt. Now, when the Asian judges were appointed, corruption came in somehow. Okay. And when the judges came in also, I think this continued. So there was a widespread perception that the judiciary was now corrupt. So when the constitution came in, a new constitution was brought in 2010. Under that, they established the vetting board, the Judges and Magistrates Vetting Board, to vet all those judges and magistrates who were in office at the date the constitution came into effect. So that was in 2010. So this body was set up almost within a year after the constitution came into effect. And very interesting happened is that we have a golf club here called the Madhaiga Golf Club. When I went there one evening, I found our president, it was President Kibaki at the time, who called me and said, "Come sit, have a drink." So I sat with him. Then he said, "I want to make you an offer. Will you accept?" I said, "President, the president makes me an offer. I can't say no. But what is the offer?" He said, I want to nominate you as the chief of the Judge Magistrates Vetting Board, which is being set up. So I said, well, that's a great honor. So of course I will accept. But under the constitution, you can't make the appointment yourself. You have to do it in consultation with the Prime Minister. He said, I'm aware of it. But consultation doesn't mean that I have to agree to what he says. I will consult. Whether he says yes or no, I am going to appoint you, as you've agreed, as the chairman of the Magistrates Vetting Board. So that's how. Okay. And we had a judge, a very senior judge from South Africa, Albie Sachs. We had the Chief Justice of Ghana, it's one of the judges. We had a judge from Zambia. We also offered to Sujata Manohar, who was a judge in India, to come and join us, but she couldn't. So we had this, so that's how a 9-man board was set up, of which I was the chair. So from 2011 to 5 years, we were now vetting all judges and magistrates. And after that process was over, I felt that it was not ethical for me now to appear in the courts because the judges now who were sitting were judges that I had vetted and certified as suitable to continue. So that's when I retired from active practice. So I don't now practice law.
You've contributed a lot over all these decades, so I think it's amazing. Very nice to hear the story as well about the vetting board.
In the government, I served first as assistant GPP, then as GPP, acted at time the Attorney General, and then, of course, as chairman of the Judges and Magistrates Vetting Board.
Lovely. So, being such an impactful and influential member of also, if I can say, the Indian diaspora community in Kenya, can you give us, like probably a present picture, or it could also be elements from history as well, of the Indian diaspora itself in Kenya? So a lot is known about the diaspora and probably in Europe, the Middle East and all that, but then very little about Indians in Africa, or just isolated incidents. But then if you can paint a picture.
Kenya, as one governor described, he said the railway is the beginning of the history of Kenya. The history of Kenya was the railway which was built. It was called the Kenya-Uganda Railway. And that started in 1895. And at that time, 1995, and was completed in 1901. Now that railway was built almost single-handedly by Indians. So the first batch of Indians, about 350 of them, were recruited from India, and they came. And the second batch of 1,000, another batch of 2,000. Eventually, we had some like 30,000 Indians working in the railway. That's how the railway was built from Mombasa right up to the lake area called Kisumu. And that's called the Kenya-Uganda Railway. Now, along the railway, the Indians set up what they call, there were kiosks set up along the railway. Now, those kiosks were called dukkas. Dukka comes from Dukan, the Indian word Dukan. The Africans call it Dukka. So this kiosk which the Indians set up along the railway line, right into the interior of extreme areas of Kenya. And that's how they developed Kenya, were called Dukkas. And the Indians, the British called us derogatorily, the Dukkawalas. So that's how, what my book talks about, is that Indian Dukkawalas. Yeah.
So
today we are about 0.02% of the population.
0.02%. Wow. Okay.
Kenyan population is 55 million. We are 0.02. We were at one time about 186,000 Indians here before independence. After independence, I think there was a lot of migration for various reasons. There was a situation in Uganda when General Ameya threw out Indians at short notice. That reflected on made the Indians here nervous. Quite a few Indians left Kenya at that time. And the British introduced a law to restrict Indians from East Africa coming and settling into England. That also started an exodus. A lot of Indians left in order to beat the deadline of that particular act. So the act had an opposite effect. Rather than not getting them into Britain, they got majority of the Indians here went and settled in England before the law, including Rishi Sunak now. His parents were here and they all left and went to England to beat that particular line. Right? So that's how Indians went, and today we are about 70 or 80,000 Indians, of which about half come from India. Now, these are not the Indians who were settled here, but the Indians who have now come in various professions, in particularly in IT and things. So they are about half of what we were. So about 35 of the previous generation and 35 or so from now from India. So there are about 70,000 Indians. But they can contribute significantly to all the welfare projects in Kenya.
That's lovely. That's very nice to hear.
Of the welfare projects. Like, to give you an example, about 65,000 children are being fed every day by Indians. And there are various projects going on, which are supported. The schools are supported, hospitals were supported, and it's going on. I had started what we call the Kenya Heart Foundation, where we were getting teams from England and America, and we were treating the children here, having operations done here free of charge for them. I am now involved in two projects. We set up on the basis of the Usha Silai in India. My wife saw the program on NDTV, and she said, "Why don't we have something like that in Kenya?" So we started a project for teaching the women here sewing not for domestic use, but to be able to work in factories. And we have an arrangement with what we call the export promotion zone, that we train, they are given immediate employment in this EPZ. So already about 1,000 of the people that we have trained are already employed in this EPZ. And this year target is about 9 to 12,000 which will be by us and employed in the EPZ. The second project that we are starting is based on the Gandhi Charkha.
Yeah.
And I think it will be launched here on Gandhi Jayanti, the next Gandhi Jayanti.
Wow.
So it's not quite the Gandhi Charkha that we are going to be used. It's based on the idea of the Gandhi Charkha. Now the Gandhi Charkha, as you remember, Gandhi used to sit on the floor. which the African women here can't do. They can't sit on the floor. They won't spin if they're asked to handle it on the floor. So we are adopting a Dutch handloom, which is operated by pedal. So the woman can sit on the chair, and with the pedal she can now operate that charka. So that is being set up by us. And a pilot project will be set up in 3 months' time, about in a place called Voi, supported by an Indian who has a safari lodge there, and he's going to fund it. So the first project, the pilot project, will be set up in about 3 months from now in a place called Voi. And then idea is to introduce it right through the country. It's going to be a revolutionary project. Where so many African local women will be trained to spin on the charka. And this the fabric has tremendous demand. Handmade fabric has tremendous demand in the United States and also in Europe. So that's the next project that I'm working on.
Lovely, lovely. No, this is very nice. You still continue to contribute, intensely.
I got in touch with the Indian High Commissioner, and I told her, I said, look, we can do it on our own. I can raise the money, we can run it, but I would like the government of India to get involved in the project, because we can make it like an Indian project, because it's going to be a revolutionary project, and we can give credit to India for introducing it, and for the idea on this being the base. So that's what we're working on at the moment.
It's very insightful.
First of them will be set up in 3 months' time. Yeah.
Wow, very, very nice to hear. When you were saying, when you were talking about this, you also mentioned about your book, Indian Dukkawalas. Yeah. Although I do, I can think of how your involvement and the story could have led there. Can you probably explain?
This is charka.
Oh wow! Okay, yeah.
That we are setting up. Yeah.
Right. Very nice. Thank you. So, what
you're talking about the book? Yeah.
Yeah. What essentially compelled you to write the book, or why did you know what brought you there?
I thought that the Indians have contributed so much to the development of Kenya. Right. As I said, we are building the railway, setting up those shops, the dukas as we call them, into the remotest part of Kenya. I said it was the Indians who actually developed Kenya. And this was not being acknowledged, I said, by anyone for the part that they played in building the railway, setting up these dukas, the remotest parts of Kenya. And we are today the backbone of industry in Kenya. The industries, most of them are run by Indians. So I said, this is not being acknowledged and it needs to be recorded. So I thought of writing this book. It's called the Dukkawalas. Yeah. And I can tell you from the preface, which I said, Edward Grieg, the former governor, had said that railway was the beginning of all history in Kenya. And by building the railway, the Asian set of small shops, the dukas, along it, and soon afterwards in the remotest part of Kenya. They tracked through thick jungle and bush and opened up Kenya for development. Asians, therefore, played their part in building the railway, and that due through very difficult and challenging circumstances. So I said, this has not been recorded, and prompted me to write this book. Right? And it's interesting, because what I used to do is to pick up bits and pieces from various sources and put it on my computer. And then when Modi came here on an official visit, Prime Minister of India, is when my wife said, why don't you now get this printed and present the book to him? Right? So I got a printer to now compile it in haste. In 7 days' time, we had some copies printed. So I went to the then Indian High Commissioner and I said to her, I said, I have this book I want to present to the Prime Minister, Narendra Modi. And she said, no, he will not accept. He doesn't accept any presents. So I said, this is not meant to be a present. It is the history of Indians. The book that I'm giving him is not as a present, but to tell him about our history. She said, no, they will not accept. So I said, fine. So what happened, there was a reception at State House for him So I took 2 copies of my book to State House.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was going into the reception area, the security fellow said, you can't take anything inside. So I left the 2 books with him. And my wife and I, we went into this reception, where we found that there were round tables. The front tables, one of the tables, I was seated. The next table, we had the cabinet secretary seated. So I went with the cabinet secretary, and I said to him, I said, look, I have this book, which I presented to Mr. Modi. Can you find out from the president if that is okay? So he went to the president. And the president and we were sort of within seeing distance. And he did this to me. Bring. And I was just, so he came to see the president is asking for the book. I said, but I don't have it. He said, what do you mean you don't have it? I said, it's with the security fellow outside. So anyway, he went outside, he brought 2 copies of the book. And then, Sharad, let me tell you this. Rather than you just present it, I will call you to say something about the book. So
wonderful, I said, wow.
So he goes to the microphone and he then announces that Sharad Rao has written this book especially for Mr. Modi, which was not so. But anyway, then I was asked to speak. So I explained to them as to what this book was about, how the Indians came, how they built the railway, etc. Then I go and present it to Modi, and I present one to the president. Now the president, in reply to Modi, welcoming Modi, he probably had in mind that he was going to tell him about how the Indians came, how they built the railway. But what he did was, as if he had now was picking it from the book, he says that, as Sharad says, he used to call me by my first name. He said, Sharad says, Indians came here in 1895. As Sharad says, they came to build the railway. As Sharad says, they built the railway, they completed in 1901. And as Sharad says, they built the Pune. It just went on, Sharad. You know? And then he ended up very interestingly. He says, but Prime Minister, let me tell you one thing. Sharad is not your man. He's my man. That's and it has done. It's sold out actually totally. So we're getting extra copy.
I was just about to say, how would our readers get a copy or something?
In fact, Badri Madan has been asking me. He said, I've never received a copy of the book. So I said, when I come next to Holland, I will bring this along.
That would be lovely. That would be lovely.
So autobiography, which is now just been completed, and it will go to about a week or 10 days time. Yeah,
that would be lovely. It would be very, very nice to get our hands on it. I'd love to read it.
So it's like 0.02% of the population have really contributed so much to the welfare projects in Kenya. They set up schools, they set up hospitals, and they've done a lot. The backbone of the industry today. Now, at independence, the situation was that the Africans were not in business at all, not even in the provinces. There was, I think, 1 or 2 doctors and 1 or 2 lawyers, and that was about all. Right? Wow. So, what happened was at the time of independence, there was tremendous hostility between Indians and Africans because we were the have and they were the have-nots. Today, that has disappeared because in the 50 years, Kenya has made tremendous progress in education, in business. The women here are very enterprising, very well educated. You know, so the gap between the Indians and Africans has disappeared. There is no gap. In fact, if anything, they are better than we are today. Right? Except for, as I said, in business, in industry, we are still the backbone of the industry.
Right.
Most of these hospitals, etc., are built by us. So in all the welfare projects also is the Indian community, which is prominent and who actually contribute significantly towards it. Yeah.
Lovely. Having said that, does that also mean that the Indian community has integrated well into the African fabric, or how have we adapted culturally? Because the differences, or probably the discrimination, has it's a completely different picture now, right?
I don't know whether this is common in other parts of the world, but the Indians here have lived in their own compartment, as I said, right from the colonial days, from the day they came to now.
Yeah.
So they have their own religious customs they are following. There are so many temples, there are so many social halls. Almost each community. The Shahs have one, the hotels have one, the South Indians have one. There are temples, different temples for different, but that continues, all right? Although there is a lot of mixing. There's a lot of mixing among Indians, and there's also a mixing which that way Kenya is unique between Indians, Hindus, Muslims, the Christians. There is no religious conflict here of any kind. There hasn't been. All right. So that is a very nice country to stay on. And the Indians still, as you say, most of them, of course, have affiliation with India. What I tell them is that in public, they should also show we have to walk that extra mile to show that we are loyal to Kenya. We are more Kenyans, you know. So, for instance, in one example, Indians here, very few of them can sing the Kenyan national anthem. So when the anthem is played, they all stand up to attention. They listen to it, he sings. The moment the Indian national anthem is set up, then you hear them singing Jana Mana Gana. So I tell them that don't do that. Either you sing the Kenyan national anthem and sing the Indian national anthem, or remain silent in both. Let it be played. And don't make it obvious that you don't know the Kenyan anthem, but you are very proficient as far as the Jana Gana Mana is concerned. Right?
Yes.
At home.
Yeah. True. So
what instances we have to show to the Africans, you see, to show to our loyalty, to prove our dedication to the country. We have to go that extra mile, you know, to
As also because it's the host country, it's also, it's dharma in a sense to do it. Right. What challenges do you think the diaspora has faced in Kenya or something probably over the years, or if you can, have they navigated to overcome them? Is there something like that?
Well, as I said that, Kenya was set up as a colony in 1920. Indians started coming here in 1895, building the railway, set up those dukkas, went into businesses. All right. So, but we faced discrimination. Because when the railway was built, to get traffic to use the railway, the governor at that time brought in South Africans to come in. So they were offered various tracts of land at very affordable prices. So a lot of shipments of Europeans came from South Africa. And along with that, they brought discrimination. That's how discrimination was introduced here by those Europeans who came from South Africa. So between from that period on right up to 1963, we faced discrimination by Europeans. Schools, colleges, hospitals, clubs, residential areas. Where I now live is an area where we were not allowed to live. When Upper Pant came here as the High Commissioner, he could not live in this area. He had to live in an area called Parklands, where most of the richer Indians lived. He was not allowed to live here, you see. So we were one of the first few Indians to come into this area, which is called Mataiga, which is like the Wasana of Holland.
Okay, Holland. Very, very interesting.
So, discrimination right up to 1963. In 63, discrimination went, the racial discrimination went. But what came was the process of Africanization. So Indians are being discriminated now by the independent Indian government. Because all the shops and businesses were owned by Kenyans, by Indians. So now they brought policies in order to get the Indians, they cancelled their licenses, they got to force them to hand over the shops to Africans. And I was the DP at the time. So I remember the Minister for Trade coming to me and telling me, he said, many of these Indians are not complying with the directive from the government that they should hand over the shops to Kenya, to Africans. And therefore, we want you to prosecute them. And I looked at him and I said, Minister, I will not do that. I said, I am against that policy. I think it's discriminatory. It is unconstitutional, it's unfair, and I, as DPP, will not prosecute a single Indian. So he said, no, this is a cabinet decision presided by Jomo Kenyatta, the president. I said, maybe so. Don't expect to prosecute, I will not do so. So he said, I'll go and see your boss. I said, you can go and see my boss. So he went to see the Attorney General. And the Attorney General asked, what did Rao say? He said, Rao is refusing to prosecute. He said, if Rao is refusing to prosecute, that will be so. I will not interfere. No Indian was prosecuted for not handing to Africans. So that's how the discrimination came in. The colonial, the one by British went off. Now the Africans had started discriminating because they wanted the shops and things like that. Even in jobs, the top jobs were being offered only to Africans. I was one of those very few Asians to be appointed first assistant DPP and then the DPP, which is the highest position held by an Indian in Kenya.
Interesting. In this, let's say the other side of this coin, are there some probably socio-cultural initiatives that Indians have taken to, to probably preserve their heritage? Because at some point you told me that the Shahs have their own, their own places of probably worship, their celebration places, and all of this details. So in this sense, have they undertaken some initiatives to probably preserve heritage, or also, in a sense, cross-cultural understanding or something like that?
Sadly, no. As I said,
right.
They live in their own compartments.
Compartment, okay.
And also, you will have the Shahs having their functions, the Patels having their function, Sikhs having their separate function. Of course, there is a mixing as far as the Indians are concerned, but there is very little mixing between Asians and Africans even today. What is there today is what we call cocktail integration. Those of us who meet them at the golf club, then we sit there and have a drink together. Right? And there is nothing. If you have an Indian marriage, you won't see a single African there. And an African marriage, you won't see a single Indian there. So that kind of mixing is not there. They're all still living in separate compartments. Although, as I said, there is no hostility. That has disappeared. So we are friendly. We have a lot of friends. The Africans have a lot of Indian friends, but very rarely would there be an African inviting us to a social function, we inviting them to a social function. So they are all still compartmentalized.
Very interesting. Very interesting. It's very different from what I imagined. But that's insightful. So how do you look at probably the future of the diaspora in Kenya, or considering probably this changing demographics now? And
as I said, you see, I tell the Indians that you have a good future here. You don't have to be afraid, because there is the hostility which was there has disappeared. As I said, they have done as well, perhaps better than Indians. So there is no hostility as far as the haves and the have-nots are concerned. All right. Business is still dominated by us, but they are also coming into businesses quite strongly. They're also coming up to hotels and tourisms and things like that. So that also is sort of, that difference is reducing. So I don't see that any problem as far as the Asian and Africans are concerned. So the Asians who are young, and the Africans appreciate that in business and otherwise they have contributed so much. As I said, they are the backbone of the industry. So they provide the jobs. If the Indians were to stop, close their shops today, close their businesses today, Kenya would collapse. It needs the Indian, to run the business. So we are in the second part today of Kenya. So I tell our Indian friends, I said, you don't have to be afraid. Nobody's going to throw you out from here. They know what we're doing, appreciate what we are doing, and they cannot do without us. It's a nice atmosphere between the two. No hostility between us and them. So I think there is a great future for those Indians who treat Kenya as their home and want to settle here.
Lovely, very nice. In the same regard, let's say, is there something that people in power, in a sense, probably from the ambassadors or from the government of India, in that sense, would there be something that they could do to probably strengthen these ties between the two countries? And it could be people's ways, or
No. You see, as I said, one was the official visit by Prime Minister Modi. Right.
Right.
Then we have had occasions where our president has visited India, and Modi very generously contributed a lot of funds towards agriculture in Kenya. Right now, we're having a situation where Kenya is flooded. Most parts of Kenya were flooded until last week. Heavy rains. And just last week, there were plane loads from India, Indian Air Force, has brought in consignment of medicines, etc., from India, for the people here. So there is a lot being done. And the present High Commissioner that we have, uh, she's very competent. One, she's very competent, very knowledgeable. She knows all about all the information that she needs about Kenya. She has it on her fingertips. Extremely good contacts within and outside government. So she's doing an extremely good job, and that has helped a lot in improving the relation between Kenya and India. And Indians also are appreciating, and I hope they know that there is a lot that they can gain from India. Not much that India can gain from Kenya, but a lot that Kenyans can gain from India. If they know that, appreciate that, I think there is a lot for them that Indians can contribute to.
It's lovely. So, how do you see for example, the future of the Indian global community going from here? It's a slightly a broader question, but then you can pick it up in any sense. How connected are we, and how should we be probably transcending India to global stage?
One thing that one now knows, and which is a fact, that in places like United States, in England, Indians are occupying very important positions. They know the worth of the Indians. I mean, in the United States, quite a few of the big corporations are headed by Indians. NASA, so many Indians. Most of the Indians, they are now appreciating that Indians are not a burden. Indians are an asset in the United States. Indians are an asset in the United Kingdom. There was a time when they were opposing our coming to they were saying blood, there will be rivers of blood will flow if you let these Indians into England and all that. And today, Ugandan Indians, Kenyan Indians are thought to be an asset as far as we have provided them the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
Yeah,
comes from
absolutely.
Kenya. America also
amazing.
Somebody from Kenya, Obama, the president.
Right.
So I think there is this understanding that I think the Indians are doing a lot. And the Indians as such are not violent, as you know. We don't we don't do violence. So it is appreciated that those Indians who have settled in America, who have settled in England, who have settled in Australia, etc., are peace-loving people. And they contribute. They don't do any violence. They abide by the rules and the laws. And that is being appreciated by those governments.
It's very nice.
Today, generally, Indians are thought to be an asset. They're not a burden on any of the countries. In fact, those countries can do well to get a few Indians there, to set up businesses, to go into professions, and things like that. So I think Indians have a bright future anywhere in the world. And as we know, India is progressing so fast, whether it's because of Modi or during Modi or after Modi, but India has made so much progress in the last 5-10 years. And the pace at which they are going, it will be one of the largest economies in the world, as it is almost there now. And the development that's been done in India, all that's going to reflect on India and on the Indians outside, because today the Indian outside is very proud to be an Indian.
Right.
Absolutely. India progress so much.
Right. No. Thank you for all these insights on India and the diaspora itself. I want to slightly deviate from what we just spoke and ask you a little bit about your entry into the sports scene. How did that happen? And how you've contributed majorly there as well.
Yeah, my first introduction into sports in Kenya was way back in 1968.
Right.
In 1968, in the Mexico Olympics, tennis was an exhibition sport.
Right.
8 countries were invited, and we were one of 2 countries from Africa to be invited to the Mexico Olympic Games. And in that team, the tennis team, I captained the tennis team to Mexico in 1968. So with that, I developed the relationship with the Kenyan athletes, with the Kenyan sports associations. So when I came back, I got very actively involved in the Olympic movement in Kenya. And, I have served on several of the sports bodies here. For instance, I have been Lawn Tennis Association, which at one time was totally European. We broke through it, and I became, at one time in 1968, I became the president of this body, which used to be entirely European. Same with badminton. I became president of badminton. And in 1970, I led the 68, as I said, I led the Kenyan tennis team to Olympics in Mexico. In 1970, I led the badminton team in Edinburgh, the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh. That's how now I become associated with the Commonwealth. So in Commonwealth, I took active part that in 1982, when for the first time in Brisbane, they created the position of legal advisor. I was the honorary legal advisor. So from 1982 to for about 40 years, I served as honorary legal advisor to the Commonwealth.
Wow. Okay.
Changed their constitution, changed a lot of things. Then my daughter said that, look, so long as you occupy this position, no one else will be able to come. So you should resign.
Yes.
So I resigned as the legal advisor. But they very kindly gave me this honorary life vice president, they made me, which I now, with the same privileges that I had when I was the honorary president, except that I don't attend the executive board meetings. Yeah, but the games, I have full accreditation at the games. We were, for instance, at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, where I met President King, who was Prince Charles at the time, and Prince Charles came to me and said, I know, is it 43 years or 40 years that you have been in the Commonwealth Games?
Wow.
I said, about that. So he said, come and have a drink. He invited us for drink. And then he said at the opening, which he was going to perform the opening instead of the Queen, he said, join us in the royal box. So my wife and I came in the royal box. So in the royal box at the opening of the Birmingham Games, we were also in the royal box at the close of the games. So my association with the Commonwealth Games has been. And then so we started in 96, they started, when I was still in Holland, they started the arbitration for sport. And Court of Arbitration then set up what they call an ad hoc Court of Arbitration at different Olympic Games. So the first one was in 1996 at the Atlanta Games, where I was nominated as an arbitrator in reserve. So I didn't serve as an arbitrator, but I was there in 96. I did serve in the games there. But after 96, as you said, I was appointed a judge in Athens. I was appointed a judge in Beijing. I was appointed a judge in London. So 3 games that I served. And then, of course, when people are being appointed, others start complaining and say, why is it that always Sharad Rao is there and we are not being given a chance? So at the age of 80, we had to retire. So I'm no longer a member of the Court of Arbitration for Sport. But in the meantime, I was also on the Conduct and Ethics Committee of the International Cricket Council. So I served on many of the dispute resolutions, including the very famous investigation they had against the 3 Pakistani cricketers, Salman Butt,
Fixing thing.
The sport fixing. So I was one of those 3 judges in Doha in that one. So I've had this opportunity of serving on the IOC. I've had the opportunity of serving on FIFA and at the Olympics. So I've gained a lot, traveled one of those in those capacities. And in fact, right now, I think my next assignment, I've just been invited by the Russian government to go to Russia in July.
Wow.
Continuous.
Right.
Whereas
Wonderful.
I've gained also a lot from my sporting.
Amazing. Very nice to hear. Very nice perspective, that sense. So before I close, I would like to ask you, is there something that, you've been so influential and impactful in everything you've done. You've not just started but also completed a lot of projects and delivered, basically. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. You've delivered on a lot of things. Would you like to give some kind of advice, or I don't know if it's the right word after speaking all of this, would you like to say a few things to people, to members of the diaspora who've with some kind of ambition have moved out?
It's basically, my theme has always been that the country that you live in should be loyal to it.
Right.
And do everything that you can towards its development and progress. And that's also when Mrs. Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister. She advised the Indians to take up citizenship of the countries in which they were living. All right? So be loyal to that country, do whatever you can towards the development of that country. Our affiliation will always be there as far as India is concerned. Right. But as I say, in some countries, like now in Holland, you have functions where you'll be singing the national anthem of India, etc. And the Dutch accept it. In countries like ours, they don't. They're very sensitive, you see. So we've got to be careful to see that they don't misunderstand our loyalty to Kenya by doing anything that they think is showing more inclination towards India than towards Kenya. So I think the message to the diaspora is, where you are living, take up the citizenship, do whatever you can to not only take up, but we have to walk that extra mile to show that we are part of that country.
Right. Very clear.
So that's very important. And I think it happened, I'll give you an example, it happened in India. My wife is married, our brother is the famous Girish Karnal, the playwright.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Karnataka, yeah.
Girish in many ways was a very secular person. And in Bangalore, I think it was near Dharwad or Bangalore, there was a playground called the Azad Maidan.
Yes.
Right, Azad Maidan. And the Indians were asking them, the Muslims, to put up the Indian national flag, which they refused. Okay. It was wrong. But they were offended by Girish. Girish said, if they don't want to, they don't want to. Right? So that became very controversial. People started throwing stones at his house and telling him he was pro-Muslim and all that. And then they called a meeting, and I happened to be in Bangalore at the time. Yeah. And they called a meeting of the communities, those who believed in secularism, to say that how we build up secularism in the country. So they said, you come from Kenya, you're from a minority of this, why don't you also come and join us? Yeah. So I sat in that meeting. So when they asked me for my views, I said, it's very nice of you, all of you here, to call the meeting and to talk of secularism, wanting to promote secularism. I want to make one. I said, there isn't a single Muslim present here. Yeah. I said, if secular, they also have to walk that mile with us.
Yes.
To make us feel that we are being secular. If they stay away from meetings like this, not a single Muslim in the whole of Bangalore can attend a meeting such as this. I said, unlike in Kenya, I said, we are loyal to Kenya, but we show our loyalty by that walking that extra mile. So should the Muslims living in India. Not just live there, fine. We accept them as part of it, as Indians. But at the same time, they must also show with that extra mile to their Indians. Now, when they refused to fly the national flag of India in Azerbaijan, I said, this is, to me, is treason.
Yeah.
How can you defend a community like this if they refuse to fly the Indian tricolor? This morning also, I was listening to some debate between an Indian and telling a Muslim that why don't you accept yourselves as being, he called the Prime Minister of India, he said, your Prime Minister. And this man corrected this fellow. And he said, it's not my Prime Minister. He's our Prime Minister. He said, when you now as a Muslim, you talk of my Prime Minister, your Prime Minister, You don't accept him as your Prime Minister. Then you expect that Hindus are being discriminatory against a Muslim. He said, you've got to also behave like Indians. It's your country. It's your Prime Minister. So that kind of thing. This is what we, as a diaspora, we got to adopt in the countries that we live. This was the advice that was given by Mrs. Gandhi. Wherever you live, take up the citizenship. Regard that country. Have your affiliation to India. Fine.
Yeah.
See? But in the country you are living, make it your home, show your loyalty, do your duties there. That's my message to them.
Very exemplary. That was very clearly illustrated. I mean, specific to today's situation as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for asking me
It's lovely talking to you.